It was a bright summer day. Will Homer was sitting on their deck in the backyard enjoying it. He was wondering, not for the first time, why he never seemed to fit in with his brothers. He didn't enjoy sports like they did, and he definitely didn't bully little kids like they did. Will was a quiet person. He wanted to be tough, but not in the way his brothers were. He wanted to stand up for the kids his brothers bullied. But whenever he tried to, he just froze up. He got scared around his brothers. That was why he was sitting here instead of playing. Later at dinner, Will asked his mom about the brown star on his thumb. "It's a birthmark, dear." That was what she always said when he asked her about it. He was not in the mood to discuss it, though, so he said, "Whatever." That night, he lay awake wondering about his birthmark. It might be possible, but he was getting the feeling that his mom was hiding something from him. He got up to walk around for a while. Sometimes that helped. As he was getting back to his room at the end of the hall, he heard a noise from his parents' room. His mother was crying. He wondered why. As he made his way back to his room, he heard whispers from his brother's room. Something fishy was going on. He put his ear to the door. "I can't believe Will's adopted." That was all he heard. He went back to his room and decided to ask his mom in the morning. Suddenly, he had an idea. His mom would write about something like this in her diary, right? He decided to get up bright and early and look in his mother's diary. In the morning, he got up as planned and walked to his mother's room. His mom and dad were asleep, and the diary was on the nightstand. What luck! He walked over, picked it up, and opened it to the most recent page. There it was, July 14th. I wish I had told Will the truth about his tattoo, about his parents, about the fire. Oh, it was terrible. I can still see the fire raging, taking his parents, everything he ever had in Smithville, but now he has a new life. What was this all about? He was an orphan? Could it be a joke? No, it must be real. His mother had no early pictures of him. He had always wondered about that, but Will stopped. He decided to go back to bed and figure it out in the morning. He couldn't take this all in. He finally fell asleep, but all too soon he could hear his alarm clock ringing, and he had to get up. He ate breakfast quickly, then went back to his room to think. So he was adopted, and his real parents were dead. Killed in a fire, it sounded like from his mother's diary. Still, Will wanted to know more. What had really happened? He was going to search for his parents, their graves, their life story, relatives if there were any. He hoped that the Smithville mentioned in his mom's diary was Smithville, Missouri. If not, well, he couldn't travel across the country. He could go across the state, but not the country. After all, there were too many Smithvilles to search them all. The Smithville Will wanted to go to, however, was only about 30 miles away. Will decided to take his bike since it would be a little faster than walking. He would sneak out at midnight and take along his bike, a map he'd copied from a road atlas, some apples and carrots, and a sleeping bag. He put all his things in his backpack. Even the sleeping bag fit after a little reorganizing. Will was packed and ready. All he needed to now was wait. That night, Will went to bed and reset his alarm clock to 11:30 because he'd need some time to make last-minute preparations. First thing he did when he woke up was to write a note to his parents, which he put on the counter where they would find it in the morning. After a few minutes, he wheeled his bike out of the garage and set off. It was a warm summer night. Crickets chirped as Trina Sodderfield finished the last of her tea. Taking care not to make too much noise, she slipped inside and saw her mother sitting in the living room, reading. "What are you doing up so late?" her mom asked. "Sorry, I just couldn't get to sleep," Trina replied. Her mother sighed. "Get to bed soon." "I was just going." "Good night, Mom," said Trina. "Good night, dear." In the morning, Trina ate breakfast, then did her usual chores. After that, her mom said, "I'm going to the orphanage to drop off the blankets I made. Would you like to come with me?" "Sure," Trina replied, and off they went. At the orphanage, Trina sat in the office while her mom went back to talk to the manager. While she was waiting, something caught her eye. It was a folder peeking out of a filing cabinet. She was bored, so she walked over and pulled it out. It said, Applewood Trina, status adopted, born Smithville, Missouri, date of birth, September 2nd, 2000. There was other information, and in the middle of the file, a picture that looked exactly like her. At the very bottom, it said, Parents, Applewood, Robert and Sarah. Trina wondered what it was she was looking at. As she flipped to the next file, she heard voices in the hall. so she arranged everything as it had been and sat back in the chair. Later, back at home, Trina was looking through her mom's pictures, trying to find the one from the orphanage. There it was, the exact same photograph. Finally, Trina muttered. She shoved it in her pocket and walked upstairs. She saw her mother's calendar out but didn't say anything. After a delicious dinner, her parents went downstairs to watch a movie, and Trina was left alone upstairs. She walked over to the calendar. She loved the pictures in it. She decided to start at July since that was her favorite picture. Instead of the picture, though, the first thing she noticed was the calendar, the 16th to be exact. What she read there nearly took her breath away. It said, "Tell Trina about her parents." Suddenly, she realized something. This might mean she was an orphan. That didn't seem possible, but what about the picture? And the calendar entry? What about the folder? As she had been putting it back in the drawer earlier, she had noticed the name of the next folder, Applewood Will. Could she have a brother? And the memory that had been nagging at her recently. A dark room, a young boy, someone saying that he had to go away, someone sobbing. Trina decided that she should find her parents and her brother. She went to bed but stayed awake for a long time, thinking. After a while, she realized she had more proof. Could her mother have been telling the truth when she'd said the star tattoo on her thumb had been put there to identify her and to keep her with her siblings if she ever had any? It hadn't meant sense when she'd been told, but now she wondered. In the morning, her father went to work and her mother left to run some errands. Trina declined the offer to come along. She had to work quickly. She only had about an hour to get out. Last night, as she'd been lying awake, she'd planned to make a run for it as soon as she could. Once her mother was gone, she packed up. In her backpack, Trina put her food, a blanket, and one change of clothes. She pulled her bike out of the garage and rode away. Mariel crawled into her little shack in the woods. It was starting to rain. She got out a few pieces of gum and began to chew furiously. When it was adequately chewed, she shoved it into the place where her makeshift roof had begun to leak. That was better. Mariel sighed and stared hard at the star on her thumb. It was a lifetime ago, but for some reason she had been thinking about her brother and sister a lot lately. Grandma didn't like to talk about them much. It made her so sad. But Mariel would spend hours here in the woods in her little hideout, daydreaming about them. She wondered where they lived and if they remembered her. Someday they would all somehow be reunited and be a family again. For now, though, Mariel's thoughts turned to the weather. Should she head back to the house now, or wait and hope the rain would let up? She decided to just go for it now. She was hungry, and Grandma would have lunch ready soon. As she headed through the woods and back onto the dirt road that led to the little farmhouse she shared with Grandma, Mariel looked in the other direction and noticed a girl on a bike in the distance. Who would be biking today? Probably a biker training for a race or something like that. As the biker got closer, though, the rider slowed down and said hello. "Hi," Mariel answered. "Where are you going?" "I'm headed to Smithville," the girl said. "I live on a farm nearby, just outside of Smithville," Mariel replied. "We should go together. I'm Trina, by the way." "I'm Mariel. I don't think I could keep up with you being on a bike." "I'll ride real slow. I'm ready for a break," responded Trina. The girls went along for several minutes in silence. Before long, one of them noticed another bike approaching from behind them. It was moving fast and soon caught up to them. A boy was riding hard, but he slowed down and said hi. They all exchanged greetings and quickly figured out that he too was headed for Smithville. The boy introduced himself as Will. Mariel and Trina introduced themselves, and they all continued on the way. Will stared hard at the two girls. "Are you sisters?" "No, we met just before you rode up," Mariel answered. "Well, you could be twins. You look just alike," said Will. Mariel didn't say anything. She was thinking hard. Something about the names Will and Trina was nagging at her. Suddenly it came to her. Grandma never spoke their names anymore, but could it be? No, she thought, that would be impossible. But at the same time, she decided she'd like to get a look at their thumbs. Just then, the clouds burst open, and it began to rain much harder. Trina suggested that they run into the woods and find shelter under the trees. They all agreed. They found some protection under a huge old oak tree, but everyone's hands were concealed, even Mariel's. She was usually very open about it, but for some reason she made a point of keeping it hidden. "So why are you two going to Smithville?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Well, I'm going to visit family," Will said. "I'm searching for my parents and my brother," announced Trina. "His name is Will, just like you," she said, pointing at Will. Of course, you couldn't be him. Well, I live there on a farm with my grandma, said Mariel. My sister and brother used to live with us too, a long time ago. Ironically, their names were Will and Trina too. It's not you, of course, but isn't that strange that they would have the same names as you? I'm actually trying to find my family too, Will said, turning a rather deep shade of red. I just didn't know if I could trust you. That's okay, Trina said. I wasn't sure who I could trust either with everything I've discovered lately and the tattoos and... Mariel interrupted her. You have that tattoo? I have a star on my thumb. So do I, Will gasped. Oh my goodness. Mariel held up her thumb, and the other two did, too. There were 3 small, identical stars. Mariel looked at Trina and Will. You don't remember, do you? What? Remember what? Mariel took a deep breath. You are my brother and sister. We're triplets. I don't remember exactly where we lived, but one day we were out playing together in a field when there was a huge fire. It burned our home and killed our parents. In the confusion, we were forgotten. But later, our grandma and grandpa came over because they always came over on Saturdays. They took us in. It wasn't very long until they realized they could only support one child. So I stayed, and you two were taken to an orphanage. I never saw you again, and Grandpa died soon after. Grandma was so sad at losing you and Grandpa that she just never talked about it. I guess it was too painful for her. Trina, Will, and Mariel stared at each other. They finally all started talking at once, laughing and trying to tell their own stories. After a few minutes of confusion, Mariel interrupted. The rain has stopped. Let's go to my house. You can meet Grandma and we'll catch up properly. I was sitting in the living room knitting while Mariel played in the woods. Suddenly, out of the blue, there was a frantic cry of, Grandma, Grandma! I jumped up, thinking that she was hurt, but when I got to the door, there were 2 other children with her, and they all looked as happy as could be. They looked so much alike, I thought. I couldn't help it. My thoughts jumped back to the time when the triplets were all here, together and happy. Will, Trina, and Mariel. I was jolted out of my daydreaming. Mariel seemed to be finishing introductions. Could you repeat that, dear? Grandma, this is Will. This is Trina. It's them, my brother and sister. Oh, honey, that's a nice imagination, but... They all held up their thumbs. Holy cow, I whispered. Then I grabbed them and gathered them all into my arms and just held them for a long time. Could it really be true? I almost didn't dare to hope, but there they were. It was really them. I called the neighbors, and we had a huge dinner in the backyard to celebrate. Everyone was so excited to welcome Will and Trina back to our family. Everyone ate as much as they wanted, and we visited for a long time. Later, as I tucked them into bed, Will asked them about their parents. I told him all about them, everything I could remember. He tried to stay awake, but he was asleep before I finished. The next day, I contacted Will and Trina's parents and told them not to worry, their kids were all right. I asked them to come over so we could all get to know one another and celebrate. Once they arrived, I said, Before we celebrate, you must make a decision. They all nodded. Will's mother spoke first. I think it's Will's decision. Her husband agreed. Trina's parents also felt that the decision should be hers. Both of the children chose to live with Mariel and me. We had so much to learn and to catch up on. I saw the sadness in their adoptive parents' eyes and assured them that they could visit often and keep in touch as much as they wanted. There was paperwork and legal matters to attend to, but when it became official, we had another celebration. Everyone had a great time, but it was really just the beginning. Trina, Will, and Mariel love being together again and are as close as any 3 siblings could be. I've always loved and cherished Mariel, but with them all together again, it feels more like a family, and this old house feels more like home again. We are all living happily ever after. The end.